Before we get into today's topic of discussion, let me ask you this. Do you really need to push every set to absolute failure to build maximum muscle? Or could you stop 1 to 2 reps earlier and still get the same gains? Most lifters have strong opinion on this, but a newer study on experienced trainees give us some surprising answers. And that's what I want to unpack with you today. Hey everyone, my name is Nick and I've been coaching people online for about 15 years now. My passion is helping lifters simplify fitness, cut through the noise, and actually get results in the gym without burning out or overcomplicating the process. Today I want to share with you some really interesting findings from a recent resistance training study that looked at exactly this question. Do you need to take sets all the way to muscular failure? Or is stopping a rep or two short basically just as effective for building muscle? If you've ever wondered, am I leaving gains on the table by not going to absolute failure? This talk is for you. So let's start with a question many of you know well. You're on your last set of leg press, for example. Your quads are on fire, your breathing is heavy, and you're thinking, if I grind 1 to 2 more ugly reps, I'll grow more, right? Or maybe you're the lifter who stops a bit earlier, keeping 1 to 2 reps in the tank because you're worried about the form, fatigue, or just being able to walk out of the gym. For years, people have argued about which of those approaches is better for hypertrophy. Some say if you're not hitting failure, you're not maximizing growth. Others say you don't need to destroy yourself, you just need to train hard and consistently. The study I'm basing today's talk on comes from the Journal of Sports Sciences and focuses on resistance-trained men and women, people who had been lifting for years, training several times per week, and many of whom had worked with coaches or even competed in powerlifting or bodybuilding. So we're not talking about beginners here. We're talking about people more like you who already know their way around their gym. The researchers set up a very smart design. They had participants train their quadriceps with 2 key exercises: a unilateral leg press and a unilateral leg extension. But here's the twist. Each person trained one leg with sets taken all the way to momentary muscular failure, and the other leg with sets stopped just short of failure using roughly 1 to 2 reps in reserve, depending on the exercise. Because both legs belong to the same person, each lifter basically acted as their own control. That means differences between failure leg and the RIR leg, reps in reserve, are much less likely to be due to genetics or lifestyle and much more likely to be due to how the sets were performed. The training ran from 8 weeks with 2 lower body sessions per week. On the fail leg, all working sets were taken to true momentary muscular failure, the point where, despite trying, the person simply couldn't complete another rep with full range of motion and proper form. On the reps in reserve leg, RIR leg, sets were stopped when the lifter perceived they had about 2 reps in reserve on leg press and 1 rep in reserve on leg extension. An important detail: before the intervention, they tested how accurately these lifters could predict reps in reserve, and on average, they were within about 1 rep of the target. That means when the study says 1 to 2 reps in reserve, it's actually fairly close to reality, not just a guess. To see what was happening to the muscles, the researchers measured the thickness of the 2 quadriceps muscles using ultrasound, the rectus femoris, the muscle down the front of your thigh, and the vastus lateralis, the big outer quad. They took these measurements before and after their 8-week training period using standardized positions and repeated scans to keep the data accurate. They didn't just stop at muscle size, they also measured fatigue inside the session. On leg press, they tracked how much average concentric velocity bar speed dropped from the first set to the last set. They also looked at how many reps lifters could perform in the first set compared to the final set with the same load, as another indicator of fatigue. And throughout the intervention, they recorded total reps and total load lifted so they could compare training volume between failure and reps in reserve legs. So what did they actually find? Let's start with a big question. Did training to failure build more muscle than stopping 1 or 2 reps short? According to their data, in these trained lifters, over 8 weeks, the answer is no. When they looked at overall quadricep thickness, combining the rectus femoris and the vastus lateralis, the leg trained to failure and the leg trained to 1 to 2 reps away from failure, both increased thickness by almost exactly the same amount. The changes were clearly beyond the margin of measurement error, meaning both approaches produced real, meaningful hypertrophy. In other words, for experienced lifters, doing moderate load leg press and leg extension, pushing very close to failure, was enough to produce similar quad growth to going all the way to failure. Those last 1 to 2 grinding reps didn't seem to offer a noticeable hypertrophy. Now, when they zoomed into individual muscles, the story became slightly more nuanced. The rectus femoris, the front thigh, showed a small edge for the reps in reserve leg, while the vastus lateralis, the outer quad, showed a small edge for the failure leg. These differences were modest, but they hint that exercise order and where fatigue accumulates might slightly influence which regions of the quadricep grow more. Heavy compound work taken to failure may emphasize certain proportions of the muscle, while leaving some reserve for isolation work may favor others. But again, the main point remains. Both legs got bigger, and total quadriceps growth was very similar between failure and reps in reserve. Where the two strategies really started to diverge was in fatigue. On leg press, the failure protocol consistently produced larger drops in bar speed from the first set to the last set. That is, the nervous system and muscles were more worn out by the end of the session when people trained to failure. When they looked at repetition loss, the reduction in reps from the first set to the final set, the failure leg again showed greater losses both on leg press and leg extension. The reps in reserve leg still experienced fatigue, of course, but the decline in performance across sets was much smaller. So even though muscle growth was similar, the cost of those sessions was higher with failure training. More neuromuscular fatigue, bigger drops in performance within the workout, and potentially a greater recovery demand between sessions. For those of you trying to balance heavy training with work, family, or other sports, that matters a lot, in my opinion. Interestingly, despite the extra fatigue, total training volume between failure and reps in reserve legs ended up very similar over the 8 weeks. On average, the total load lifted and the total number of reps performed were comparable. The likely pattern is that failure training squeezed out a few extra reps early on, but paid for it with larger performance losses later in the session, while reps in reserve training did slightly fewer reps per set, but maintained performance better across sets. Now, when you sum all this up, the total stimulus was comparable, which helps explain why hypertrophy outcomes were also comparable. From a coaching perspective, this matches what I've seen over the 15 years working with lifters. The people who make the best long-term progress aren't usually the ones going to failure on every set. They're the ones who train hard but controlled, keep most of their sets around 1 to 3 reps in reserve, and accumulate quality volume week after week without constantly needing to back off or deal with nagging issues. This study gives us solid evidence, at least for trained lifters' quads, that stopping 1 or 2 reps shy from failure can build essentially the same muscle as grinding out every last rep while leaving you less fatigued. So how do you apply this in your own training? Here's how I translate these findings into practical guidelines. First, make close to failure your default. For most working sets, aim to finish with around 1 to 2 reps shy from failure, 1 to 2 reps in reserve. That means the set is hard, you have to focus, but if someone insisted, you could probably force out 1 more rep. Second, reserve true failure for specific situations, maybe the final set of an isolation exercise or machine-based movements where the risk is lower and you're not compromising big compound lifts later in the session. Third, think about the session-wide stimulus, not just one heroic set. Your goal is a productive workout and a productive week, not a single all-out set that leaves you toast for the rest of the session. You will also get more out of this approach if you learn to judge reps in reserve honestly. In the study, trained lifters were generally within about 1 rep or their target reps in reserve, which is pretty good. You can develop that skill too. Every so often, you can take a set to true failure just to calibrate your senses of effort. Then go back to reps in reserve based training with a better feel for what 2 reps in reserve really means for you. Over time, your body awareness improves and you can use effort more intelligently rather than just chasing pain. Now, it's important not to overinterpret these findings. This doesn't mean failure is useless or that nobody should ever push as hard as possible. It doesn't prove that every muscle group, every exercise, and every rep range will behave exactly the same. What it does show is that in trained lifters, doing moderate load leg work going very close to failure appears sufficient to maximize quadriceps growth, and the extra fatigue from going beyond that point may not be worth it for most people most of the time. I want to bring this back to why I do what I do. My mission as a coach is to simplify fitness, to take complex research like this and turn it into training plans that real people can follow consistently, confidently, and safely, while still getting great results. If you're listening to this and thinking, I'm tired of guessing how hard to push, or I'm not sure how to balance reps in reserve, volume, recovery, and progression, or I want a plan built around my life that actually moves me forward, that's exactly what I do with my online coaching. I help you set up training that uses evidence-based principles like the ones we've talked about today, find the right blend of intensity, volume, and reps in reserve for your body and schedule, and progress week after week without feeling wrecked or confused. If you'd like help applying these ideas to your own training, check the link in the description to learn more about my online coaching and to apply. We'll take this kind of science, strip away the complexity, and build you a program that you can actually follow and that finally gives you the results you've been chasing. If you made it this far, thank you guys for watching, thank you guys for listening, and I hope to see you in the next one. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay sexy. Until next one, peace.